Hey, this is Daniel Corey of Danger Cat's Bloodworth and Image Comics Moriarty in Red City, and you are entering the Fanbase.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fanbase Weekly podcast. This is a special edition of the podcast, a Fanbase Feature panel discussion on the recently released Ant-Man and the Wasp from Marvel Studios. With me, as always, we have a wonderful host of panelists. We have Justin Peniston, who is the co-creator of the Hunter Black comic book series. Hello, Justin.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Always glad to have you here, sir. We also have Bryant Dillon, president of Fanbase Press, and just awesome guy. Hi, Bryant.
I love being an awesome guy. Thanks for having me.
That's why we both have you here, because you are both awesome guys and you have wonderful thoughts on the Marvel movies. So, before we dive in, we want to give you a big spoiler warning. We will be diving into a deep dive, rather, of the film. So, we want to make you aware, if you have not yet seen Ant-Man and the Wasp, please be warned. We will be diving into spoiler territory. In addition, Bryant, before we get started, can you give us a summary of what the film is about?
Sure thing. After the events of Captain America Civil War, Scott Lang is grappling with the consequences of his choices as both a superhero and a father. During the last few days of his house arrest sentence, Lang is approached by Hope Van Dyne and her father, Dr. Hank Pym, once again. In 1987, the original Wasp, Janet Van Dyne, was lost in the quantum realm. After Lang's trip and return from the quantum realm in the first Ant-Man film, Hope and Hank believe Janet may still be alive and plan a rescue attempt with Lang's assistance. Lang must once again don the Ant-Man suit and this time fight alongside the Wasp on an urgent mission that soon leads to secret revelations from the past, as the dynamic duo finds itself in an epic battle against a powerful new enemy who can phase through physical matter and is known simply as Ghost. Ultimately, Janet is located and rescued, while Ava, a woman who suffers from quantum instability and is also the secret identity behind Ghost's mask, makes peace with our heroes when they agree to help remedy her specific condition. In a mid-credits sequence, Pym, Lang, Hope, and Janet plan to harvest energy from the quantum realm to continue helping Ava. Lang is attempting this in the quantum realm when Pym, Hope, and Janet all disintegrate as a result of Thanos' snap in Infinity War.
Thank you, Bryant. That makes me sad all over again. Oh, no. Anyway, what was everyone's general reaction to the film? Justin, we'll start with you.
I really enjoyed the film. It was one of those rare moments where, when watching a film, I get to take off my writer, editor, critic hat and just go along for the ride. Yeah. And that, to me, is the ideal summer action film. So I really enjoyed it.
Nice. Bryant?
I also had a great time at this film. I'm a little bit on the lower end of the enjoyment scale. I will say that it was great. All the MCU films, including this one, are better than the average, I think, theater experience. But this film, I had a few wishes that... basically, I wish that the story had been a little more focused on Janet and Hank and sort of the quest to get Janet back in the quantum realm. The Ghost and Ben Foster stuff only worked so much for me. It was there are many things I loved about those characters and their plot lines, but in general, I don't know that it was fully realized, and it suffered a little bit, the film as a whole, for me.
Okay, fair enough. I really enjoyed the film. I thought it was a lot of fun. I almost think that I enjoyed this more than the first Ant-Man and the Wasp.
Really?
Separate the cats.
Our cats are fighting in the other room, if you can hear that crazy noise in the background.
Yes, I think I enjoyed this more. I love Michelle Pfeiffer, so I think she ups the quality of any film that she is in. And I love Lawrence Fishburne. And I think, it was just a lot of fun. I had a great time. I think any film, which leads us to our next question, I think any film that immediately follows Infinity War is going to have a hard task of really pulling in audiences. And I think that it did a great job, especially because it was a lighter film. So what are your thoughts post Infinity War? Were you waiting the entire time to know how this fit into the Infinity War timeline? What were your thoughts going into this film because of the snap, as it were? Justin?
I pretty much had wholly let go of Infinity War when I sat down in the theater. I knew going in, this is set before Infinity War, so I didn't really carry a lot of that baggage with me. Mm-hmm. The only thing I was hoping for in that regard, perhaps, was I was hoping for an after-credit scene that did something more with Captain Marvel.
Okay.
A further tease, and I didn't get that. But other than that, I wasn't putting too much weight on it in that regard, and so wasn't at all disappointed,
Sure.
And I found, the other two MCU films, recent MCU, Black Panther is a very heady Shakespearean level,
right,
action film. Yeah. Infinity War is all the characters, everyone dies, they're big, heavy films,
Yeah.
Black Panther's a little lighter in moments, but it's still a heavy film. Mm-hmm. And this movie was it was light and fluffy, but it still had stakes, I was very much invested in the fact that they were really only fighting for one person's life. But each side was fighting for one person's life. They're fighting for,
sure, yeah,
which woman's life are we going to save? And, and it was about people jeopardizing things in their lives. It's really about Scott jeopardizing his life because he doesn't have a person at stake except his daughter. Mm-hmm. She's not going to die. Right. He could just maybe lose his ability. I was really, really... I thought that the stakes for all the main characters worked really well. It was personal, but it was still intense, and I found it really enjoyable.
Well, what I would definitely agree with you on is those relationships. I think especially like the focus on family, the focus on both fathers and their children and mothers and their children. It was all that was the strength of the film for me. Like I loved that stuff. And what is really cool about this film, also that I would agree with Justin, is that it didn't have any kind of pressure. Whether the audience went in with expectations, it didn't do anything except what the MCU has been doing for a while. It's a sequel to the previous film. It has a different tone that's all its own. It is not attempting to be, one of these things like Black Panther. Each or Infinity War. Each one of these films, I feel like, does have the confidence and strength of like, hey, this is a Captain America film, or this is an Ant-Man film, this is an Iron Man film. They do tie into the other larger universe, but they don't bend to its will completely. And this is completely like, if you loved Ant-Man, then you're going to love Ant-Man and the Wasp. You get a lot more of what you got from that first film. It expands in a lot of cool ways. And one additional point that I think ties into both like the films before and after is there's this cool thing going on where I think there was a couple articles that mentioned this. I don't remember exactly where, but there's this cool thing going on where during the promotion of the film, Kevin Feige has been talking a lot about moving the female characters forward for the MCU, that there's going to be, the next stage of the MCU is going to be female-led. We know that Captain Marvel is on her way and will be in many ways taking some sort of leadership role of the Avengers. We've seen like how many strong female characters we had in Black Panther, how many were represented in Infinity War, and this very much felt like Wasp and in both generations moving forward. So I think there's this almost cool kind of precursor look of like, all right, they're definitely moving all the chess pieces to have these characters sort of take center stage, and I look forward to what that means for the next Infinity War and beyond.
I would totally agree. And I think that one of the important things that I'd like to focus on is the cast of the film, and specifically for that reason. I think we had a really stellar cast, and I think that even though I wouldn't say that this is a slice of life film, but it really does follow and land on the performances of its characters. Not only the more comedic characters like Michael Pena, who is really there for laughs and is so freaking funny.
So great, yeah.
He's so good. But it does fall on the backs of these characters to really take us through the story, make us quickly care about them and care about what their struggles are and conflicts throughout the film. And especially the female characters in this film. We had Evangeline Lilly return as Hope Van Dyne and be introduced as the Wasp. As we talked about briefly, Hannah John Kamen, who is Ava Starr, otherwise known as Ghost. And then, of course, Michelle Pfeiffer as Janet Van Dyne. And I want to read a quote that Evangeline Lilly said recently about the film, because she spoke recently to The Hollywood Reporter about her attempts to keep the character tough but feminine, and said, quote, "In her fight scenes, as trivial as it might seem, I really pushed and fought for her to fight with elegance, grace, and femininity. She moves differently than a man. I wanted her to have a signature style that little girls, like I was when I was a feminine, girly little girl, would be able to fall in love with, emulate, and relate to in their own movements." So both with the character of the Wasp, with Ghost, with the original Wasp, as it were, Janet Van Dyne, what were your thoughts on the depictions of women in the film as well as their performances? Justin, we'll start with you.
First of all, the Wasp is a character that's near and dear to my heart. I was an Avengers fan in the 80s, and I remember when they very deliberately moved her from being the ditzy socialite to someone who could command the Avengers, you know, and I loved that. I thought she was a great character because she still loved fashion, and she still, you know, had a great sense of humor, and she was still flirty, but she could get down to business. I thought she was a great, well-rounded character. And when I say that neither version of the Wasp in the movie are like that character, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't need them to be. But the Wasp is someone that I really like. I really loved just how competent she was, you know, and that was really enjoyable. And I think her goals were met in terms of, I mean, she had a very feminine yet still kick-ass fighting style, you know, and I thought that was cool. If one of my minor quibbles with the movie, because I don't think, I'm not sure you could do this any other way, but it was clearly from, the story was clearly told from Scott Lang's perspective. You know, he was the eyes through which we saw everything. I mean, everything that Hope did practically was done with Scott either present or as an observer, except for maybe at the very end when Scott was unconscious. And so it was rarely a movie that the Wasp, she didn't have a whole lot of agency, you know what I mean? She was sort of rolling along. But I don't think it was, I felt like Ghost had a lot of agency, you know?
Sure.
So I don't feel like the film was selling its female character short when I say that.
It was just offering different situations.
I felt like this was a really nice step in the right direction in terms of dealing with female characters in superhero films. It wasn't Wonder Woman in that regard.
No.
But, you know, she took one of my, you know, quiet favorite characters and made her cool. And I liked Evangeline Lilly a lot in this movie. You know, I think she's got real chops, and I look forward to the Wasp as an Avenger. Maybe the most disappointing thing about this movie for me, and it's not about this movie; it's really about going forward. And again, here's the spoiler. You know, in the mid-credits scene when all the characters are dusted, I was hoping that Hope wouldn't be, because I was looking forward to in Avengers 4 some scene with the original Avengers, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Hulk, Thor, and Iron Man.
That would have been cool.
You know, and now it feels like we won't get quite that. You know, but we'll see. You know, anything could still happen.
Absolutely.
But other than that, you know, it was great. That mid-credit scene was great.
That was awesome.
That was really, you know, I was like, oh, I really wanted to see the next movie then, you know.
And just to go a bit further with Hannah John Kamen's performance, what were your thoughts on the character of Ghost?
I I loved that she wasn't a traditional mustache twirling villain.
Yes.
You know, I mean, it's hard to hate on someone who's literally just fighting for their lives.
Sure.
And, you know, they did a great job of establishing this gal's been through the ringer. You know, she's been used and abused and just, you know, she had no evil intent. She was just desperate, just horribly, horribly desperate. And I thought the film showed that well. It made her still an antagonist, but it didn't judge her for being a victim of her circumstances. You know, and at the end of the film, you know, the heroes helped her.
Yeah.
And she seemed to be moving in a positive direction, you know. I thought... And she... I mean, I bought into her story. I felt her desperation. You know, I thought she did a really great job. Really well performed and well written.
Bryant, what about you? What are your thoughts on the women of the film and more specifically the character of Ghost?
Well, I'll start with Ghost. I will. Well, let me just first say I agree with Justin. I think that this film overall did a really great job of including a lot of female characters, making them all different from each other, have different strengths and weaknesses and complexities. I also agree that I thought both the villains, if you can consider Lawrence Fishburne's character a villain as well, or you know, they both were interesting in the manner, or unique, I would say in some ways, by not being straight up just like evil people that were dead by the end of the film.
Right.
You know, they were layered in a more realistic way. They had more complex intentions and relationships with our heroes, and honestly, I would say they've done a great job with the Hank Pym character in general, like with the various relationships, and with Scott Lang and all of them. The way they have relationships is believable. You know, like these weird adversaries are sort of believable, I guess, collateral to some of the personal faults that both those characters have. But taking it back to the female characters, I think there was a great representation. I loved Michelle Pfeiffer as Janet Van Dyne, which I expected to. I think that the character of Hope got to do a lot more in this film, and it was really satisfying to have the Wasp just fully realized. If anything, like I can't complain about anything in this film in regards to the Wasp. It almost though makes me want to go like, there was no need to wait so long. Like in some ways, I'm like, maybe it was okay to wait till the end of Ant-Man to sort of, you know, give her the suit, but like she could have been part of Civil War, and that would have been really interesting. She could have been in some of these Avenger films, you know. I am sort of like Justin, a little bit sad that she won't be around for the next Avengers film, but my hope with that is that that's because they're planning to move all these characters who are turned to ash into like the spotlight come the next phase, and so that's very exciting because I think thinking about this capable, strong, confident character being part of the Avengers team is really exciting, and it's interesting to think like how that character will interact with some of the other characters moving forward. For Ghost, I'm eager to watch the film again because this feels like Iron Man 2 or Thor 2 or some of these other films to me where Avengers 2, where I'm on the fence when I watch it the first time. I enjoy a lot of things, but I'm not sure how I feel overall. Excuse me. And Ghost is a character where I feel like I didn't connect with this character this first time viewing, but I feel like I might start to more as I watch it, and I feel sort of the same way about Lawrence Fishburne. That plot line was less interesting to me, less captivating. There's part of me that really, maybe I had different expectations, where I really wanted to see something that was a play on the title, Ant-Man and the Wasp, where we saw both more of the previous Ant-Man and Wasp and the modern day version, and I loved those scenes with the family, all four of them together so much. I sort of craved seeing more of that. So I think going back in with some sort of tempered expectations, I'm actually going to enjoy a lot of these characters like Ghost that maybe I didn't first connect with. But what I do constantly appreciate about the MCU once again is it's not just cookie cutter archetypes plugged in. Like, these characters are slightly different. They are unique. They have their own sort of insider stories or plot points that they bring up that sort of provoke, I think, other discussion about like lots of things. Like the idea of being quantumly, or I guess, what is it, unstable, quantum instability that this character has. I mean, it's very fascinating. It's interesting to see what rabbit holes that will take us down with discussion as we watch this film over and over again. And it's interesting because there's like sort of a slight, I would say, like peek into like what potentially a taste of a Fantastic Four film could feel like. The focus on family and sort of it will be totally different because those characters are very different and this has a unique tone. But that feel of like when Hank and Janet and Hope and Scott are all working together, it has that sort of fun family feel to it,
Mm-hmm. Justin, was there something that you wanted to add earlier?
Only when you made the reference to the Wasp not being in Civil War. Mm-hmm. I do know that there were versions of that story that included the Wasp.
There were,
and I think I think one of the driving forces for not putting her in the movie was to create the conflict between Ant-Man and the Wasp for this movie. So that there would be that sense of, Scott being on the outside again,
And I can understand that. That's something where I will go ahead and very often I forgive these things with the MCU because when you get down like 4 more films down the road, you're like, oh, this makes so much sense. They knew where they were going. So it's a minor complaint, I think. But maybe again, I'm just so eager to see, like you, this character interact with the Avengers characters and sort of get into action. And I mean, I guess the elephant in the room is, I mean, it's sort of unfortunate that with all the strength the MCU had, that it has taken, like, we're just now starting to get a taste of, like, what is, like, a female-centric Marvel movie look like. And the fact that the DCU beat them to the punch with Wonder Woman, it's kind of like, there's no reason that should have happened. So I don't want to put that all on any of these films because when you look at the larger picture, they're telling an epic story where they're going their own direction. So who are we to say you should have done this there or this there? But there is part of me that goes like, I don't know that they have a complete legitimate excuse for not taking some of these characters and getting them to this point already. It's nice that the Wasp is now part of the world, but I feel like she could have been earlier.
I agree. I think they're a little bit saddled by the fact that all these characters were created in the 60s.
Yeah.
So they didn't have a lot of great female characters.
Mm-hmm.
Marvel's got, a cornucopia of great male characters, that are with deep roots in the Marvel Universe. And not a lot of great female characters. All their great female characters tend to be a little newer. Mm-hmm. I mean, Storm is a generation behind,
Sure.
Invisible Woman and the Wasp.
Sure.
And that's basically all there was to get started. Was Invisible Woman and the Wasp. And the MCU didn't have access to the Invisible Woman. They had Black Widow. And it is hard to justify not having had a Black Widow solo film by now. I mean, because let's be real, Iron Man wasn't exactly, a household name going into this.
Right.
Which made him less of a risk at the time. They weren't jeopardizing Superman like DC chose to do. But... So I kind of get why it hasn't happened thus far, but I'm not sure that necessarily excuses it.
Right.
Sure, yeah. I think we're in similar spaces with
that.
But why are... Let us ask, the woman at the table.
I feel like the woman hasn't really weighed in on these female characters.
Yes. I honestly feel like... I came to know the Wasp through the Ultimates series. That's when I really got to know the character, and obviously that's a very specific iteration of the character, and one which I don't think needs to be depicted in film right now.
It wouldn't be appropriate for what they've built in the MCU.
Exactly. I don't know that the for listeners who may not know, I don't know that an abusive storyline to a wife for the Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne character dynamic is going to be helpful to the conversation right now. I think obviously in different mediums, yes, this needs to be discussed. But I don't know that they would have been strong with so few female characters depicting one that is in an abusive relationship.
I will say, just to touch on that,
Yeah.
even in the 616 Marvel Universe,
It's the same.
Well, there was an isolated incident where Hank Pym hits Janet Van Dyne, and it kind of happened by accident.
Okay.
Like there was a miscommunication between the writer and the artist, and so it ended up making it to print, and they ended up having to run with it.
Oh, wow.
But Hank Pym was ruined as an Avenger for decades as a result, and became much more of an adversary for a long time. It wasn't depicted quite the same way. It wasn't he's an abusive guy. It was, although some writers fell into that and just were like, here's
this
a guy
is who he is. Yeah.
But it was depicted more as this is a guy who succumbed to horrible stress and maybe mental illness. This is the guy who created Ultron. This was the guy in the comics. This was the guy who created Ultron.
Right.
And this was the guy who, he hit his wife, and he just they had a lot to deal with, a lot of things to unpack with that. But the Wasp, Janet Van Dyne, was never depicted as a victim.
Okay.
She was a superhero. She got hit once, and that wasn't cool. But she was never acted like a trauma victim. She acted like somebody was like, "Oh, I can't be with you." Oh, you're a jerk. It was really well handled in that regard. But I agree, in a Marvel universe with so few great female characters, the last thing you want to do is bring that baggage into it.
Well, can I clarify,
of course,
because I feel the need to clarify this point, that it's not that, I want to say this as delicately as possible, it is not that a woman who is in, or any individual who's in an abusive relationship, can't be depicted as strong or can't have agency. Yeah. I just want to make sure that I'm clarifying that. But simply that, like you were just saying, Justin, there are so few characters depicted right now, and I feel like it may have been more negatively impactful to audiences, especially those who have experienced trauma or have been in abusive relationships, that I don't know, I feel like I saw this a lot in Game of Thrones, that audiences are less want to see abusive relationships depicted right now, specifically for the trope of women only finding strength from having trauma in their past.
Well,
so I think for that reason,
it's divisive for the audiences. Some people will find strength in it, and some people will see it as exploitive or focusing on something that doesn't need to be depicted in media right now.
But go ahead.
Only just to follow up on that, the reason it works in Game of Thrones, because, like it or not, first of all, every character in Game of Thrones goes through some horrible trauma.
Of course, that world is horrible.
Yeah, but also, Game of Thrones is rife with great female characters. If someone said the best three characters in Game of Thrones are Cersei Lannister, Arya Stark, and Daenerys Targaryen, no one would say those are terrible choices. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, those are three amazing characters.
Well, you could literally have three different female characters that you would argue, no, it's these three characters.
They're amazing female characters. So it bothers me less when that uses a trope in Game of Thrones. But the MCU doesn't have that luxury now.
And the MCU also doesn't, and whether this is right or wrong, the MCU doesn't challenge stuff like that head on. Like, say, comparing it to, in the comics, we have the Demon in a Bottle arc for Tony Stark, where he's become an alcoholic. They touch on that. They have Tony drink excessively, and people comment on him sort of becoming a loose cannon. But they transfer that addiction to his suit.
Yeah.
And they make it about his suit. So even if they were like, we want to touch on this idea with Hank Pym, I feel like there would be some sort of way that Hank was being abusive, or controlling, that was, in some different manner, almost like they take the edge off of it a little bit and make it more digestible to sort of explore some of these subjects.
Actually,
you know?
and I do want to come back to that idea of the themes, not only of this film, but of the MCU as a whole. But I do want to touch on one more thing that you had actually brought up about, Justin, about the available female characters. I think one of the downsides for me, being a huge X-Men fan, is not having access to those characters, because I think that the X-Men universe is rife with amazing characters. I can't wait to see more Rogue, especially in the MCU. I'm just really hopeful that one day we will see that, because she's my favorite character. But I agree that Storm is one of the most powerful and amazing characters in the X-Men comics. So hopefully we will see more of those characters. But I do think that Marvel's heading in the right and positive direction with depictions of its female characters, but it will never be enough until we have a movie all with women.
that might be closer than we think.
Absolutely.
Let's hope we're right about that.
It definitely feels like they're building a strong team of female characters. I don't know that Valkyrie's ready to carry a story by herself yet, but she definitely, I'd like to see more of her. You know, the Wasp, outstanding. Ghost gave me a great preview of what a Kitty Pryde film could look like. You know, because you never walk around thinking, boy, Shadowcat, great combat skills. You know what I mean? You don't really think about her. I mean, they literally had to turn her into a ninja to make her more formidable, because phasing through things didn't seem like a great offensive power. And yet, well, look at this movie.
No, I've seen some amazing things in comics where she uses her phasing in fatalistic ways.
It got more like that towards the latter end of her existence, but at the beginning, I mean, she walked through walls, she ran from shit. You know what I mean?
No, she was kind of character on the run. Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, Bryant, I want to head back to what you were talking about more with regard to the themes of the films, because I think that that's something that the MCU has done very successfully with its films in depicting different themes, no matter the tone of the film or the style of the film, that you're still taking away something, either that was directly acknowledged within the film or something that was so subtle. Even with, I would say, Black Panther, there were so many amazing themes that may not have hit you while you were watching it, but that when you sat with it and thought about it, were just, as you said, Justin, Shakespearean level things to consider about characters, about our world and our society as it is right now. So really, really stellar. And I want to point out an article from The Root by Jason Johnson about how Ant-Man and the Wasp is all about how bad the criminal justice system is in America, even for white guys, which is a quote from Johnson's article. But I also want to tie it into the fact of something that both of you, Justin and Bryant, you both touched on with the character of Ghost, because I don't think this is necessarily just about Ant-Man. I think it's more largely a theme of redemption as a whole, because I think we're definitely seeing that with Ghost, and showing that she can be redeemed because of what her life has been and what she has been through and been forced to do. But that she, both through the character of Ben Foster and even through the character of Janet Van Dyne, that she is someone who is worthy of care and worthy of love and worthy of being helped and supported, even through what she has been through and what she has done to other people. So I'm curious what your thoughts are with the idea of redemption in the film, and with the idea of how it more directly applies with the depictions of the criminal justice system in this film.
Well, weirdly, what I would say, weirdly, and I don't mean to be contrarian, but I don't know that I would argue that there is a huge focus on redemption in this film. I honestly, one thing that I actually find kind of refreshing, and that I didn't really realize until this article pointed out, but very much like what you were saying, I think that the MCU films, one of the reasons that I love them is because they have not only great themes that touch on larger subjects that hopefully you go and discuss after watching the film, but they'll have like a moral lesson. Mm-hmm. You know, like almost like it's not, I think, as like it's not the same as sort of the fairy tale level of Star Wars, where there's like this sort of story about good versus evil. But there are things that I think if you're watching as a child, these films are meant to sort of show you, like, complex situations and how a hero figures out how to get through that situation. And one thing, they each have their different flavor. One thing I love about the Ant-Man films now, looking back, is they are depicting the idea of an ex-con not being, like, they're showing how difficult his life is because of the legal system. But there's never this feeling I felt in either film, and maybe I'm blind to it, so I'll have to watch these again, but I never felt that any of the ex-cons, whether it's Scott or his 3 or 4 friends, I never felt like, oh, these people are automatically bad. These people just have to redeem themselves in some way. More what I felt continuously through that is, here's these guys who have, sort of a bad hand dealt to them, and they're struggling to make things work. But they still are like a family, and they still help each other out in thick and thin, and seem like well-rounded individuals for the most part. I mean, they play most of his friends as sort of comedic individuals, but they also have like sort of unique, weird interests and stuff that make them like and focuses and little stories that make them seem like real people.
To jump in,
go ahead.
And Justin, I want to hear your thoughts as well. I feel like Marvel would have done a disservice by treating or depicting any of these characters as bad individuals simply because of what was done. And I think that that's the point, is depicting these characters as morally good people who perhaps have been dealt a bad hand or have had to overcome certain adversities, challenges in their lives which led them down a certain path or to specific actions. But I think that that's the purpose, is showing that, no matter who you are, that you can overcome these things. You can have opportunities provided to you, and that more specifically with the Ghost character, that that you can be loved. You're a lovable person, which I think from the mental health perspective of perhaps the criminal justice system is something that's not thought of. What is the impact emotionally and mentally of these things on these characters, and showing that society, which perhaps is more wont to put ill on these individuals or depict them as negative or bad people, is an incorrect way to go. So I don't know if that makes sense.
I'll let Justin speak to those. The only thing that I was saying basically is that I felt like it's done in a subtle way that reminds me sort of like a few years ago, Sesame Street introduced a character whose father was or mother, I can't remember, but their parent was in jail. And it was because they found out that so many children were watching and had a parent who was incarcerated. And I think this is something that I didn't realize that is a value of the Ant-Man series before until reading this article, is that there is now a character, and not just one, but a group of characters depicted in the MCU who are ex-cons, who do have to struggle with that kind of life. There's a child who has a father who is an ex-con and also a superhero, depicted as a hero, and those things offer some subtle things, I think, to younger viewers watching these movies that maybe I didn't truly appreciate until coming across this article.
This actually, because I haven't read the article, but it gets pretty layered. I think my first observation is that they don't really say what everyone is in jail for, why they're ex-cons, what their crimes were. I infer that none of them were violent criminals.
Sure. That seems pretty clear.
I mean, and they go out of their way to say, maybe just because you broke the law doesn't make you a bad person. Certainly, they make the very clear choice to have Luis in the first Ant-Man film go back into danger to rescue someone he doesn't know. To make sure that person doesn't die. That's an overtly heroic act, a brave heroic act. And with Ghost is a violent person. Ghost has killed. She straight up says it.
That's true, yeah.
But she killed at the behest of the government. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so they're certainly dabbling in the, in waters that say that, again, there's an implication that being legal and being good are not necessarily the same thing. You know,
it kind of, and tell me if you agree, but it kind of ties into the Winter Soldier idea a little bit.
A little.
More similar to Black Panther, or not Black Panther, but Black Widow's storyline, where she worked for a government organization and then turns the corner.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really note until you guys mentioned it how much redemption plays a role in this. And it kind of, to bring it back to our earlier discussions of, you know, of the comic versions of some of these stories, in both films, both Ant-Man films, the villains are a product of Hank Pym's somewhat abusive past. That he doesn't treat people well. That is made very clear.
He makes a lot of enemies.
Yeah, you know, but of people who are close to him.
Yeah.
You know, I forget Yellow Jacket's character's real name, but Yellow Jacket was a protege of Hank Pym's that was never treated with
doesn't feel like he got
respected. And Hope feels that way about her father. Bill Foster feels that way about Hank Pym.
Is it Bill Foster or Ben Foster?
It's
I
Bill
think
Foster.
I said Ben Foster.
I said Ben Foster as well.
I'm sorry.
It's Bill Foster.
Bill Foster, okay.
You're too polite to correct this, Justin.
Well, you know, I actually didn't think it was that big a deal. You know?
That's okay.
He was Black Goliath.
we apologize, everyone. And Howard Stark was a similar situation with Hank Pym. Like, apparently they were close, and then that turned sour as well.
And Ghost's father was rejected by Hank Pym on a certain level. You know, I mean, it's, you know, hearing the two versions of the story, you know, clearly the problem was there was static between Hank Pym and this other person. You know what I mean? And Ghost's father. And Hank is having to redeem himself, you know, by you know, doing these heroic things and reclaiming his family. You know, all these things that are broken because he wasn't a very nice person.
Sure.
You know, so that theme of redemption and the question of, you know, where does the line between what is right and what is lawful? You know, all of that I think plays very thematically throughout every character's arc. And the other thing I want to mention, which is not necessarily to this point, but I neglected to mention earlier, about female characters, because there was a really interesting spotlight put on Cassie, Scott's daughter. And, you know, in the comics, she does become a superhero.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. She is one of the Young Avengers. She is stature. You know, she can shrink and grow, you know. And
are you aware that there's been an actress cast as a teen Cassie?
Yes, I am aware of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that was part of why I brought it up, because, you know, that character, you know, and have you ever read Young Avengers?
We have not. No.
That is a spectacularly good comic.
Who is that written in?
Alan Heinberg.
Alan Heinberg?
Alan Heinberg, who famously wrote for Sex and the City, I believe.
Okay.
Really big gay Hollywood screenwriter. But he wrote the Wonder Woman script.
Okay.
He did a not as well publicized. I don't think it got to finish. I think it was part of the problem. He wrote a good Wonder Woman arc in the comics, but Young Avengers, you know, I mean, it was a miniseries what he wrote, and it was amazing. And again, great, you know, Young Avengers, Cassie, Hulkling and Asgardian, who were a gay couple.
Okay. Yes, I remember that.
Was his name Patriot? The young Captain America, the grandson of Isaiah Bradley.
I think he was.
The original test subject for the Super Soldier Serum, the black guy.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
You know,
I remember reading about these characters when they were putting
these
together.
It's a real diverse group of characters born. And then the new Hawkeye, the second Hawkeye.
Okay.
Who is, you know, comes from privilege, you know.
Right.
It was a really eclectic, interesting group of characters. And Cassie, I would love to see some version of the Young Avengers, because it seems clear there's going to be a time travel element to Avengers 4.
Right, yeah.
You know, and so it'd be interesting if they go to a future with a next generation of Avengers characters, and maybe we'll get to see some cool female characters.
That would be very cool.
Yeah. Avengers forever.
Well, I do want to touch on the other characters of the film. Obviously, we have the colleagues, the ex-con. I love that that's their name of their company.
I love
ex-con.
that too.
It's
Ex-con.
amazing.
So great.
But we have David Dastmalchian as Kurt. He's the gentleman with the amazing hair in the team.
Yes.
We have T.I. Harris as Dave. And obviously, Michael Pena is Louis, who is just simply amazing. I really honestly felt like Michael Pena carried some of this film for me. I feel like his humor and his character was just spectacular.
He steals both of the films.
Yes.
You know, like his scenes, the scenes that focus on him in both Ant-Man films are arguably the best films in both films.
Yeah.
You know, and I really appreciated how they found an organic way with the truth serum scene.
Oh my gosh.
To go back to his flashbacks, you know, and the way he tells a story and making that visual. And I love that the way the rest of the cast kind of buys into that. And, you know, like he's telling the story, but you're seeing his words come out of Evangeline Lilly's mouth. And, I mean, I thought that was really well done.
That was spectacular.
And, you know, it's hilarious. His brand of humor doesn't always hit this well. Like, I don't know if you ever saw Chips.
No.
That wasn't quite as, you know, but here he kills it. He kills it, and whatever else they do, it would be a huge mistake to do any Ant-Man and the Wasp films without that character.
Absolutely.
I would agree. The ensemble entirely for me is what works. Weirdly enough, like I am like lukewarm on Michael Pena. Like I love what he does in these films, but I feel like very often I talk to some friends who are just like outside something that I really love, and that's the way I feel on this. I feel like it's good, I like it, but like people love this character, and I just have to appreciate like there's something working here for everyone. But what I do really like is the ensemble of all of these characters. Scott with his ex-con friends. That works entirely for me. I don't think I want to see just Scott by himself. You know, like I feel like the Ant-Man thing, the Ant-Man films, or even a Wasp film, if they do a solo Wasp film, I think need to incorporate some of these characters. I like having, you know, Hank back. I like having Hope in these. I like having his family and I don't know the character's name, but like his ex-wife and the
Judy Greer and Bobby Cannavale.
Yeah, both. I mean, they're phenomenal. I don't need them there all the time, but like not have them, it makes it not feel like part of the world of going into Scott Lang's life is having connections to all these various families, you know, and I think that's important. I don't think the Marvel has done such a fantastic job of not getting lost in like, well, this is an Ant-Man film, so it's just Ant-Man doing something against a hero or a villain, you know. And
I actually have to say, and maybe this is really corny, but I actually really appreciated the new dynamic and familial relationship with Judy Greer and Bobby Cannavale and Scott and Paul Rudd, their characters, because I feel like maybe this is intentional, but I feel like Marvel is respecting the fact that there are so many different family dynamics in the world, and that it's great, especially in a movie that is talking about redemption and is talking about family, to show a family that can be separated but still positive and supportive of one another.
Yeah.
And I thought that was like a really small thing, but I felt like it went a long way. I loved that it wasn't just like Bobby Cannavale still like doubtful of Scott's character.
Well, and that would be wouldn't that be
Yes.
the predictable way to go? Isn't that's what's such great about these films? The predictable thing would be like, well, let's make it. Oh, the events of last time made it even worse, and like instead we have this weird, lovely thing happening that allows them to focus on other things because they go, what if they got closer?
Yeah,
and not necessarily that weird. I mean, my sister has a son from her first marriage and a daughter from her second marriage.
Sure,
and regardless of how she gets along with her, you know, ex-husband and her current husband, to see either one of those men with both of those kids is always heartwarming. You know, they always treat the kid to whom they're not related wonderfully respectfully, you know, and treat them like, this is my child's sibling, and I'm going to treat this kid that way.
Yeah.
And those two men treat each other very civilly. And, you know, because this is my kid's sibling's father.
Yeah, right.
You know, and there's whatever else is going on, they we want our kids and our family to be happy, you know, and that's always very heartwarming to me. I'm always like, wow, that's really cool. The rest of my actual family, we don't get along that well, you know. So seeing Bobby Cannavale, be like, let me get in on this to hug them, and you know, it's clear, you know, even in the first movie when he was an antagonist, he wasn't an enemy.
Right. No, yeah, he
know?
wasn't the evil.
No, he was just
stepfather.
He was the guy trying to do what was right.
Yeah, what he thought was a questionable relationship.
Yeah, and I love Bobby Cannavale. I think he's a great actor.
He is fantastic.
And I love Judy Greer. I think she's good in everything
she does.
Yeah. You know, and I hate that she's right now on the outside looking in on these franchises, you know.
She always seems to get cast as the mom and
you know,
hey, you show up for 5 minutes and
I
go
think
away.
she's great.
No, she is. She's believable instantly.
Yeah, and I really, I think that is a heartwarming thing to see.
But what is especially it's not weird in real life that, what you're saying is that's the way we experience the world right now.
Yeah.
It's authentic. It to me is somewhat weird to see a big budget, massively connected Disney property finding a way to go hey, naturally from a script writing perspective, dramatic tension, make the relationships on the rocks, keep going that way. To go, no, let's show this completely believable thing working. There's not any kind of conflict. The conflict is coming from somewhere else as opposed to the more predictable, oh, I can't agree with the stepfather. I can't get along with my ex-wife, you know?
It's actually, I think, important and believable, and it works as conflict. Judy Greer is the one who's always taking on the FBI in this movie. She's always the one yelling at Jimmy Woo. Yeah. You know what I mean? And the stepdad is well, actually, you know. But,
and that works really well.
And it works, you know. The dynamic is perfect, you know. And it's important that his ex-wife is coming to his defense. Oh, yeah. You know, I think that's a good thing. Yeah. You know, that just because a marriage doesn't work doesn't mean that people, you know, it's...
And it's modeling that behavior for their daughter as well, which I think is
big
really
time.
important.
Yeah.
So, and I have to say, I love Jimmy Woo in this film.
He was pretty fantastic.
The scene
really awesome.
at the end when they were talking about getting dinner, oh my god!
Randall Park is a comic genius, though. That dude is so funny. You know, he's you know, he really made the most of his small role in this movie.
That was amazing.
Well, and he seems comedic, like cartoony in a way, but then completely believable. You're like, I don't believe you're real, but at the same time, you exist somewhere. I know I've run into you.
And again, I mean, Jimmy Woo is a Marvel character. He's a SHIELD agent.
Oh, is he? I didn't know that.
Agent. Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Oh, and I mean,
I would love if he gets drafted into SHIELD at some point.
Yeah, I mean, that would be pretty awesome. But yeah, I mean, he is. SHIELD has a very convoluted history in the comics, but he's an old, established. I mean, from the 60s or 70s.
Okay.
Oh wow!
Yes, you know, spy character member of SHIELD.
Cool.
Worked for Nick Fury. Yeah,
he was hysterical.
Yeah, he was great.
Oh my gosh. One person that we haven't yet really dived deep into character-wise is Lawrence Fishburne's character with Bill Foster. And I think that this really goes to the same conversation that we were having about not just building a mustache-twirling antagonist, but showing how someone can have a challenging past or have made perhaps bad decisions, but that doesn't necessarily make them a bad person, and perhaps they're doing them with the right intentions in mind. And I did appreciate that about Lawrence Fishburne's character. I think the only complaints that I have in the entire film, and this is one of those complaints that's just it's because I wanted more Lawrence Fishburne, I think that was the only thing for me, is that I really wanted more from this kind of B-plot storyline, because I think Lawrence Fishburne is such a phenomenal actor, and I want to see more of him, and I want to see more of that dynamic between him and the Ghost character. What was everyone else's thoughts on the character?
He was... I think you're right that there wasn't a lot there for the character, and, you know, Lawrence Fishburne made a lot out of a little.
Yeah.
You know? I never thought of Bill Foster as a villain in this movie. Never. Well, no, not never.
There was a slight moment when
you're like, oh, he's the bad guy, you know.
Basically, where it's all centered around when he turns on the decision to sacrifice Janet to save.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because at first he's like, maybe we'll do this, and then moves away from it.
When I realized what was going on, when all the exposition had been handed out, I literally found myself thinking, they're literally on the same quest that our heroes are on.
See, I didn't think of that. That's a great
direction.
thought, though. That is a fantastic thought.
They're just trying to save one woman's life, you know? Our heroes are basically saying, look, we're going to rescue Janet. And if that means it's not possible to save Ghost, so be it. You know what I mean? People are making their choices. No one's making the wrong choice. Everyone's breaking the law. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so it was complex and interesting and fun and really well executed. I like Lawrence Fishburne too. I mean,
and it was so cool to see young Lawrence Fishburne. That was awesome.
Man, the de-aging technology was amazing.
It's fantastic.
It was really good.
Yeah,
that's the one complaint that I have. Is slightly, I guess, or I guess I've had more than one complaint.
You have had a few,
but one of the minor complaints I have that I agree slightly with you is I just wanted to see more of the past. You know, some of these things that we were told. And I struggle with this being an actual complaint because I think you could weigh down this film too much. It's nice that it's a shorter, lighter film. But I do feel like some of the things that we were told, I would have liked to see more of the backstory regarding Ghost, the backstory. I would have loved to see an actual, more conflict, I guess, between Hank Pym and Lawrence Fishburne's character. I don't know. I'm questioning it as I say it, but I love these past scenes so much. Everything from seeing Hank and Janet working together in the past to seeing sort of some of the encounters with people like Howard Stark and Peggy Carter in the first Ant-Man. You know, this stuff is so interesting to me, and the idea that you have characters like Lawrence Fishburne's character, like Michael Douglas's character, that can open the door to these flashbacks.
I have a feeling you're going to really love Avengers 4.
I might like that. I also probably will really love, I think, Captain Marvel, which is essentially just an extended look back. I love this idea of kind of going back to a time we know but haven't really seen the MCU show.
Right.
That's really fascinating. Seeing the 90s in the MCU will be fascinating. Seeing the 60s in the MCU is fascinating.
Sure.
Well,
and I have a feeling that, and this transitions well because sadly we are running out of time, but as we always do at the end of these Fanbase features, we recommend to our listeners other properties, books, movies, comics, TV shows that they may enjoy if they enjoyed Ant-Man and the Wasp. And I almost feel like, Bryant, that transitions really well into what you were saying, because a lot of times we leave these movies wanting more, which is a great thing. I mean, the idea that you're coming out of this being like, I need more.
Better to give them just not enough than just too much.
Absolutely.
I think, for an audience.
Sure.
And I think that we here as the panel and also our listeners out there would love to visit perhaps comics that they might further explore these characters, whether in similar iterations or different iterations. Like, Justin, you were talking about a few of the characters from the original 616 or from Ultimates. So for our listeners, are there any specific properties that you would recommend that they check out?
I have a far-reaching
list
of thoughts. The first thing, for anyone who enjoys Lawrence Fishburne, to see him in an interesting supporting role, doing interesting work. If you've never seen Hannibal, the TV show.
I didn't realize he was on Hannibal.
Oh, yeah. Have you seen Silence of the Lambs?
Yes.
So he plays Scott Glenn's character.
He's basically
He's the FBI guy. He's the FBI boss.
So he's the boss of Will... Will Graham? Yeah.
Okay.
So.
And in the Hannibal TV series, it's set before Red Dragon. It's set before Hannibal Lecter is in prison.
Okay.
So Hannibal Lecter is a consulting psychologist
he's working with them, so they'll go have dinner with him and talk with Hannibal about their court cases.
Yeah.
It sounds fascinating, but terrifying.
It's
I've
an
heard
amazing
it's
show.
Gruesome.
Super gruesome.
Okay.
I cannot believe that show aired on primetime network television.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an NBC show.
Do you consider it more gruesome than Game of Thrones?
Different.
Different.
It's different.
But comparable? Like if someone said,
I'll say this:
it says bothers me.
My wife can handle the gruesomeness on Game of Thrones.
And cannot.
She cannot handle
Okay,
Hannibal.
fair enough.
Okay.
You know,
Fair enough.
I mean, and Hannibal has no nudity. You know, it has no profanity. You know, you're not, but it's gruesome.
Oh,
right?
God.
Wow.
And it, like, so much of it is implied.
Okay.
that,
Sure. That's
Your
what
mind
I
is
mean.
filling in all
I mean,
the
when
blanks.
you're watching Hannibal, you know, he's cooking and he's butchering organ meat. And the only thing that makes it awful is you know that it's not, they're not cow's lungs, they're human lungs.
So you're not necessarily seeing people slaughtered or...
Oh, you see some stuff.
Sometimes? Okay.
You see some stuff.
Okay.
It's more like, mostly it's more like Seven,
Okay.
where you see the aftermath
Okay.
rather than the final
But
act
seven
itself.
is
Seven
I would
is
say far
pretty
worse than say something like Saw,
gruesome.
Yeah,
where you
it's
see everything.
really
because
gruesome.
if
Yeah.
it's
It's
done
really-
right.
Because it's
Yeah.
artistic and it's so much of it occurs in your imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I mean, my wife got an episode and a half into Hannibal, and it was like, I'm done. I'm
Yeah.
done. You know, because it's about all these crazy serial killers
Yeah.
seen through the mind of Brian Fuller, who is a morbid man. I
But
love
he's so
Brian
sweet.
Fuller. I love him. Well, he started on Star Trek.
Yes.
You know what I mean? He's a Deep Space Nine writer. You know, have you ever seen Pushing Daisies?
No.
Okay. Things I'm recommending.
Okay.
I recommend Pushing Daisies. A brilliant television
Yes.
show. If I could bring one television show back from the dead, it would be
I've
Pushing
heard
Daisies.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's because Pushing Daisies was a victim of the writer's strike and never got to really explore everything it was going to do. But it was
Okay.
a great, touching. It's a fairy tale television. It's like Murder, She Wrote as a fairy tale through the eyes of Tim Burton.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
got that bright Edward Scissorhands palette.
Mm-hmm.
It was great. I could talk about Brian Fuller stuff all day long.
So you would recommend Hannibal?
Hannibal, for anyone, for a fan of Lawrence Fishburne.
Okay.
I mean, he's a supporting character in it, but he's great. You know, it's one of those shows where you really see the value of being kind of a little understated, a little, you know, he's spot on in it. Everyone's spot on in that show. And I don't know if I can't think of a specific storyline to recommend, but if you can get any of those great reprints of the Avengers comics written by Roger Stern in the 80s.
Okay.
You know, you'll get that. There's a great comic. I want to say it's Avengers 219, but I could be completely wrong with the issue number. It's an issue. You see Yellow Jacket, Hank Pym, in the foreground, facing away from you, and you see the other Avengers walking towards him, backlit by the lights from a Quinjet.
Oh, wow.
And you realize that this is a conflict. It's like, and I think that's the issue where Hank Pym hits Janet Van Dyne.
Okay.
And, you know, it's about the fallout. And, you know, again, it's just, it's powerful and it's rough and it's hard, but it's good. It's not exploitative. I thought what was done in Ultimates was kind of exploitative. But I'm not Mark Millar's biggest fan. And that's the way he tells stories. It's not the way I would tell stories.
Sure,
so that's
sure.
just, you know, it's hard to argue with his success. He knows what works. But, and then, because we were talking about it earlier, and we've talked about Game of Thrones, if you like Game of Thrones, you should watch The Expanse. It is maybe the best science fiction on television right now.
We will have to give this another try.
It's got that sort of slow burn that Game of Thrones often has. You know, I mean, I skipped 2 seasons of Game of Thrones and feel fine. You know, so it builds up, and it's, you know, lots of disparate storylines, and there's a lot of political intrigue. It's not just, you know, ray guns and aliens.
Sure.
You know, but man, the payoffs on that show are tremendous. Just like our Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
You know, when you reach something big, it's big and it hits hard.
Yeah.
You know, so
Awesome.
those are my recommendations.
Excellent. Bryant, do you have any recommendations?
I honestly, I don't have a ton because I don't know this character a lot beyond this on-screen adaptations and then the Ultimates. So I would say that I enjoyed the Ultimates a good degree if people want to check that out, but I would put a precursor that it's got a little bit of, I would say, the DC cinematic universe in it. It's much darker, it's much rougher. It does have a cinematic feel to it. Brian Hitch's artwork is pretty phenomenal throughout, and they replicate the look of a lot of characters based off of certain celebrities. So if you're into stuff that's a little bit rougher, or are a little bit, I would say, takes the shine off your superheroes a little bit, you might enjoy it. But if you're looking for lighter fare, I would go somewhere else.
Well, I want to say a huge thank you to Justin Peniston, Bryant, Dillon. My name is Barbra Dillon. I hope that you've enjoyed this Fanbase Feature panel discussion on Ant-Man and the Wasp. You can find more comics. You can find more podcasts like
and
this
comics.
one and comics at the Fanbase Weekly. You can find us on fanbasepress.com or on our iTunes page. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Justin, do you want to give a shout out to Hunter Block where listeners can find it?
Hunter Black Comics. It is a webcomic. It updates every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You can find it at hunterblackcomics.com. We are just putting the finishing touches on a site redesign. The comic is going to look really spectacular. It always looks good, but now I think it's going to look really, really good.
Oh my goodness.
Much bigger pages. And yeah, check us out. I think we're going to go live this week. So
Sweet. Excellent. Well, again, gentlemen, thank you so much for chatting about Ant-Man and the Wasp with me. And listeners, we'll see you again soon.
This has been part of the Fanbase Press Podcast Network.